Hey people, get ready to crush everyday TOEFL iBT tests for all modules and make your dreams come true. I'm your motivator and I'll be guiding you through the test prep videos. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe or you'll be missing out on some serious preparation.
Some people prefer living in cities, others prefer rural areas. Which do you prefer and why? Begin speaking now.
I prefer living in cities. Cities have many things. There are many shops and restaurants in cities. Also, there are many jobs in cities. I think cities are very good for people who want to work. In rural areas, there are not many jobs. Also, it is very quiet in rural areas. I don't like quiet places very much. Cities have buses and trains, so it is easy to go to places. Rural areas don't have these things. So I think cities are better than rural areas for me. I like cities because they have many things to do.
I strongly prefer living in cities for two main reasons. First, cities offer greater career opportunities. For example, I am studying business, and most major companies are located in urban areas. Having access to internships and networking events would be very helpful for my future. Second, cities provide a wide variety of entertainment and cultural activities. Whenever I feel stressed, I can visit museums, restaurants, or attend concerts easily. While rural areas may be peaceful and have beautiful nature, I think the advantages of city life are more important to me at this stage of life. Therefore, I believe living in a city better suits my personal and professional goals.
Personally, I have a strong preference for urban living, and this stems from two compelling reasons. To begin with, cities serve as economic hubs that provide unparalleled access to diverse career opportunities. As someone pursuing a degree in finance, proximity to corporate headquarters, investment firms, and professional networking events is invaluable. For instance, many of my peers who relocated to major cities secured internships at prestigious firms within months. Furthermore, urban environments foster intellectual and cultural enrichment that I find deeply stimulating. From internationally acclaimed museums to cutting-edge culinary experiences, city life continuously broadens one's perspective. Admittedly, rural areas offer tranquility and a closer connection to nature, which I genuinely appreciate. However, on balance, the dynamic and opportunity-rich nature of city living aligns far more closely with my long-term aspirations.
Starting next semester, Lakewood University will launch a new peer tutoring program to support student academic success. Under this initiative, high-achieving upperclassmen will be trained and compensated to provide one-on-one tutoring sessions in core subjects including mathematics, writing, and science. Sessions will be held in the newly renovated Student Learning Center on weekday afternoons and evenings. Students may register through the university's online portal. University administrators believe peer tutors can offer relatable academic guidance that professional instructors may not always provide. Applications for tutor positions are now open, and all interested upperclassmen with a cumulative GPA of 3.5 or above are encouraged to apply before the semester deadline. Two students, a male and a female, discuss the university's announcement about the new peer tutoring program posted on the campus bulletin board. The male student strongly supports the new peer tutoring program. He argues that peer tutors are more relatable than professors because they recently faced the same academic struggles, making their explanations clearer and more practical. He also points out that the program benefits tutors themselves, as teaching reinforces their own understanding of material and provides valuable work experience that strengthens job applications after graduation. The student expresses an opinion about the university's announcement. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Begin speaking now.
The man thinks the peer tutoring program is good. He gives two reasons. First, he says peer tutors understand the problems of students because they also studied the same things before. So their explanations are better and easier to understand. Second, the program is also good for the tutors. They can get experience and it helps them when they look for jobs later. I think the man's reasons make sense. The announcement says tutors will be trained and paid. So many students will want to be tutors. The program will help students who have problems in math and writing. This program sounds very useful for everyone at the university.
According to the listening, the male student has a positive attitude toward the new peer tutoring program announced by Lakewood University. He provides two main reasons to support his opinion. First, he argues that peer tutors are more effective than professional instructors because they recently experienced the same academic challenges as current students. This means they can explain difficult concepts in a more relatable and understandable way. Second, he mentions that the program also benefits the tutors themselves. By teaching others, tutors reinforce their own knowledge and gain practical work experience that will strengthen their resumes. He seems genuinely enthusiastic about the program and believes it creates a mutually beneficial learning environment for both tutors and students seeking academic help.
The male student in the conversation expresses strong and well-reasoned support for Lakewood University's newly announced peer tutoring program. He offers two substantive justifications for his enthusiasm. First, he contends that peer tutors hold a distinct pedagogical advantage over professional faculty in that they have only recently navigated the very academic difficulties that struggling students currently face. This shared experience enables peer tutors to deconstruct complex material in accessible, empathetic, and highly practical ways that formal instructors may be less equipped to replicate. Second, he underscores the reciprocal benefit for the tutors themselves, noting that the act of teaching consolidates one's own mastery of subject matter while simultaneously providing tangible, resume-worthy professional experience in a competitive job market. Taken together, these points lead him to conclude that the initiative represents an innovative and mutually advantageous solution to campus-wide academic support needs.
Classical conditioning is a fundamental learning process in psychology first identified by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. It occurs when a neutral stimulus becomes associated with an unconditioned stimulus, one that naturally and automatically triggers a response. Through repeated pairings, the previously neutral stimulus, now called a conditioned stimulus, begins to elicit the same response on its own. This learned reaction is known as the conditioned response. For instance, a stimulus that inherently causes salivation can be paired with an unrelated sound until that sound alone produces salivation. Classical conditioning helps explain how organisms learn to anticipate events and adapt their behavior based on environmental associations. A psychology professor lectures about classical conditioning and illustrates it with a real-world example of a person who developed an anxiety response to the smell of antiseptic after repeated childhood hospital visits involving painful injections. The professor describes a person who, as a child, frequently received injections at a hospital. The pain of the injections naturally caused fear and distress. Because the smell of antiseptic was consistently present during those experiences, it eventually became associated with the pain, so that simply smelling antiseptic, even without any injection, now triggers strong anxiety and dread in that person. Using the example from the lecture, explain the concept of classical conditioning as described in the reading. Begin speaking now.
The readings say classical conditioning is when a neutral stimulus become a conditioned stimulus. The professor talk about a person who was scared of hospital smell. When they was a child, they get injection at hospital, and the injection cause pain and fear. The hospital smell was pair with the injection many times. So later, just the smell make them scared, even without injection. This show classical conditioning because the neutral stimulus, which is the smell, become conditioned stimulus, and the fear is the conditioned response.
According to the reading, classical conditioning is a learning process where a neutral stimulus becomes associated with an unconditioned stimulus, eventually producing a conditioned response on its own. The professor illustrates this with the example of a person who developed anxiety toward the smell of antiseptic. As a child, this person repeatedly experienced painful injections at the hospital, which naturally caused fear, an unconditioned response. The antiseptic smell was always present during those moments. Through repeated pairings, the smell itself began triggering anxiety, making it a conditioned stimulus. This example clearly shows how classical conditioning works by transforming a previously neutral stimulus into one that produces a learned response.
The reading defines classical conditioning as a process in which a neutral stimulus, through repeated pairing with an unconditioned stimulus, eventually elicits a conditioned response on its own. The professor provides a compelling real-world example to illustrate all four components. As a child, a person frequently received injections at a hospital. The pain of the injections served as the unconditioned stimulus that naturally provoked fear and distress, the unconditioned response. At the time, the antiseptic smell was merely a neutral stimulus with no inherent emotional meaning. However, because it was consistently present alongside the painful injections, the smell gradually became a conditioned stimulus. Now, even without any injection, simply encountering that antiseptic odor triggers strong anxiety, the conditioned response. This example precisely mirrors the reading's explanation of how organisms learn to anticipate events through environmental associations, demonstrating each stage of the classical conditioning process clearly and accurately.
A neuroscience professor delivers a lecture on neuroplasticity, covering two main points, structural plasticity and functional plasticity, with a specific real-world example for each. The professor first explains structural plasticity using a study of London taxi drivers, whose hippocampi were measurably larger than average due to years of memorizing complex city routes, showing the brain can physically grow in response to sustained use. The professor then discusses functional plasticity through the example of stroke recovery, explaining that when neurons in one brain region are destroyed, neighboring or distant regions can form new connections and assume the lost functions, allowing patients to regain speech or movement. Together, these points illustrate that the brain remains adaptable throughout a person's lifetime. Using points and examples from the lecture, explain neuroplasticity. Begin speaking now.
The professor talk about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity mean the brain can change. The professor give two example. First, the professors say about taxi driver in London. Their brain, the hippocampus part, become bigger because they need to remember many roads. This show brain can change when we use it a lot. Second, the professor talk about stroke patient. When stroke happen, some part of brain is damaged, but other part can do the job of damaged part. So the person can recover. These two examples show that brain is not fixed and can change.
The professor's lecture is about neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize and change itself throughout a person's life. Two main points are discussed. First, the professor explains structural plasticity using the example of London taxi drivers. Their hippocampi, the brain region responsible for navigation and spatial memory, were found to be significantly larger than average because of years spent memorizing complex city routes. This shows the brain can physically grow from use. Second, the professor describes functional plasticity through stroke recovery. When part of the brain is damaged, other regions adapt and take over the lost functions, allowing patients to regain abilities like speech or movement. These examples together show that the brain stays flexible and capable of change even in adulthood.
The professor explains neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable capacity to reorganize its structure and functions in response to experience, learning, or injury, by developing two distinct types with compelling examples. The first is structural plasticity. A landmark study of London taxi drivers found that their hippocampi, the brain region central to spatial navigation and memory formation, were measurably larger than those of non-drivers. Crucially, the longer a driver had been working, the more pronounced this enlargement was, demonstrating that sustained cognitive demand can physically reshape brain tissue over time. The second type is functional plasticity, illustrated through stroke recovery. When a stroke destroys neurons in one brain region, neighboring or even distant regions can compensate by forming new synaptic connections and assuming the damaged area's responsibilities, enabling patients to progressively recover lost abilities such as speech, motor control, or memory. Together, these examples powerfully illustrate that neuroplasticity allows the human brain to adapt dynamically, growing in response to mental demand and reorganizing itself to overcome injury throughout an individual's entire lifetime.
Hey people, how was your test? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious fun. See you tomorrow!